Nature, read in Scute and Claw, by Paleontologica. 3:56 p.m. Brett Abbott sat at his desk, a mug of coffee clutched tightly in his hand. The last week had been uneventful, a series of mundane incidents, easy to deal with and quickly resolved. Frankly, the job was starting to grow boring. He'd joined the Queensland Animal Control Unit because he wanted to help the people, to root out the wheat from the chaff and deal with problematic animals. Now, a mere 5 months into his career, he found himself becoming as jaded as the crooks he once caught. It was going to be a long Thursday. The morning dragged on, and with each passing moment, Brett's boredom grew. The job was a far cry from his years as a copper in Sydney, where every day, even on the dullest day, provided an opportunity to catch some of the city's most notorious criminals. He'd been privy to some of the worst criminal acts imaginable, but in Queensland, it felt as if everything was a slow-burning fuse. There were no explosives, no car bombings, no bloody hostages. No, this was empty in comparison to police work. And now the phone was ringing. Sergeant Abbott sighed. It was probably something incredibly mundane, like a possum. Hell, even a cat stuck in a tree wasn't so far-fetched. Maybe it would give him something to do for a change, like a nice little break from the mundane. QACU, Brett Abbott speaking. May I take your name and address?
Hello?
Asked the frantic voice of a young woman on the other end.
This is Kate McVie. My address is 34 Lempton Road. It's my husband. I think he's been attacked by a crocodile.
Abbott paused. Now this he wasn't expecting. What's your location? The woman choked on her words as she tried to speak.
The banks of the... Oh Christ. Sorry, banks of the Styx River. Sharon Point Conservation Park.
Now Abbott wrote down the location, forwarding it to the appropriate authorities. Stay on the line, ma'am, he advised. I'm notifying the law enforcement agencies and all professionals. There will be a zoologist in sight, Madeline Hatch. I need you to remain on the line until they arrive, okay? The woman took a deep breath and then tried to regain her composure.
Okay.
How's your husband? Is he conscious?
He's conscious, but he's not lucid. I didn't see it happen, but his goddamn arm's gone.
Abbott cursed under his breath. The paramedics should be with you in a few minutes, ma'am. Just remain calm. Deep breaths. 4:15 p.m. The sight that greeted the paramedics was nothing short of gruesome. The victim of the attack, who Katie McVie said was named Paul, was lying in a pool of his own blood. Rimming the wound were bite marks, and their shape and size were enough to confirm the suspicion of the attending zoologist, Madeline Hatch. It was probably a big salty.
We're going to have to take him down to the clinic for an x-ray,
said Dr. Hatch.
And I don't think there's any doubt about it being a salty. The spacing of the bite marks, the inferred size of the animal, the attack on a human, they're all indicative of a very large saltwater crocodile.
Paul McVie was lying on an operating table, his skin as pale as death, his eyes open but staring, unfocused. Katie bent down and stroked his hair, trying to comfort the man.
Don't you die on me, Paul. I promise I won't leave you.
Glancing towards the ambulance, Dr. Hutch said,
There's a good chance he's going to make it, but don't get your hopes up just yet.
Picking up her medical equipment and packing it into a small suitcase, she started to walk back over to her dusty Vauxhall Astra. There was something that wasn't quite right about the attack. Something implacable. Maybe it was the way the trail of blood started so far from the lakeshore. Salties were typical grab and submerge killers, while this sort of behavior was a lot more like a Cuban crocodile or something. But there weren't any that big, and there weren't any living at Sharon Point Conservation Park. Were there? Hutch was about to climb into her car when she heard the sound of an engine in the distance. Turning around, she saw a black Ford Transit speeding through the dusty bush. Moving slowly and carefully towards them, it came to a halt, and a man stepped out. He was clad in a t-shirt with a symbol shaped like an 8-point star on his dusty black coat. The word WAPIG was inscribed. "Dr. Medlin Hutch?" the man asked. "Vic O'Grady. I'm with the Wildlife Attack Prevention Group. We're a government-funded organisation that deals with invasive species."
"Why haven't I heard about you?"
Hutch asked. O'Grady shrugged. "We're not usually the most publicised of organisations. Most of our work is conducted under the radar."
"Why would that be?"
"If you heard about an invasive spider, would you want it to cause panic, or deal with the problem discreetly?"
"I don't know. It depends."
O'Grady nodded. "Exactly. We prefer not to take such chances. We'd like your help dealing with this situation. We suspect that we're dealing with an escaped Cuban crocodile."
"It would make sense. If they didn't grow up to half the size of an average salty."
"You know your stuff, I see," O'Grady said. "In either case, we need your assistance. I can't speak for this case, but there's another incident about 10 miles upriver. A young woman's been mauled to death by something." He adjusted his glasses. Something that wasn't a salty. 5:43 p.m. The woman that lay on the table was in her early 20s, about 5'8", blonde hair and hazel eyes. Her clothes, a Spandau Ballet t-shirt and faded jeans, were stained with blood. A huge gash over her stomach revealed gnawed muscles, rended organs, and crushed bone. A cursory glance at her arm revealed much the same patterns of injuries, minus, of course, the organs. Her name was Katerina Petrov, 23 years of age. She was on vacation from Moscow, graduate student at Moscow Art Theatre School. Hutch grimaced as she regarded the body. The attack had obviously been one of incredible brutality, ferocity unmatched by most animals. There was no room for error in a situation like this. This was definitely an animal attack, and unless Hutch figured out what they were dealing with, it would happen all over again. Reaching out a gloved hand, she placed a hand on the corpse's arm and turned it over. The pattern of bite marks, the size of the wounds, the spacing of the bite marks, it was all wrong.
"I don't get it. The modus operandi of any large crocodile is to drag its prey beneath the surface and dismember them using a death roll. But the pattern of injuries is more like what you'd see from a Komodo dragon or something. She was killed and eaten on land. Cuban crocodiles don't feed like that. They feed like other brevisterine crocs."
"Brevisterine?"
"Short-snouted. Think gators and crocs rather than gharials."
O'Grady nodded. "And you're saying this wasn't a Cuban crocodile?"
"I don't know. Something that big, and on land no less."
For a second O'Grady looked ahead. Finally, he let out a low sigh. "All right," he said, his voice a little lower. "I can show you more data if you want. You're on the right track."
"What do you mean? Did you know about this?"
O'Grady gestured for her to keep her voice down. "Listen, I'll bring you to the WAPG facility. There's some more information there that I'm sure you'll find interesting." 7:53 p.m. 2 hours. 2 goddamn hours. It had been that long since they started driving. And O'Grady hadn't said a thing since. It made Hutch anxious for some reason.
"The WAPG doesn't exist, does it?"
O'Grady looked up for the first time and said, "Didn't take you long."
"It's not hard when you're sitting in silence for 2 straight hours."
"Sorry for that. Got a lot on my mind at the moment. My wife and I are getting a divorce, you see. She's taken our 2 kids, Millie and Ben. It's been rough."
"Divorce?"
"Yeah. She wants to remarry, take herself and the kids off the grid and find a new life. I don't know what I'll do. I'll probably go back to Sydney when the money runs out. Maybe do some more research. I was thinking about taking a degree, or maybe getting a job as a zookeeper or something to that effect." He paused and hesitated. "Anyway, I suppose you want to know about who I actually am, who I really work for." Hutch nodded. O'Grady took in a deep breath. My organisation is a multinational government-funded organisation dedicated to defending the general populace from the creatures and/or pathogens that emerge from what we call temporal aberrations, rips in the space-time continuum. As for the rest, they'll have to wait. After that, the two of them drove in silence. Hutch was taken aback by how nonchalant the guy was about this whole thing. Was he insane? Was he fucking with her? Was he actually telling the truth? All questions that O'Grady did his best to not answer. Then again, if this guy was actually messing with her, he'd have to be a great liar. 8:20 p.m. The black van pulled up outside a large metallic building, like a military outpost, nestled deep within the confines of a dense forest. O'Grady pulled the keys out of the ignition. "All of your questions are about to be answered," he said, unlocking and pushing open the door to the van. Hutch climbed out through her own door. She glanced up at the building's facade. It was like surprisingly high-tech, replete with enormous surveillance camera turrets and machine gun towers. It was surrounded by a high wire fence topped with razor wire. There were signs around the perimeter of the fence, warning not to trespass, and that the area was protected by armed guards. The place just plain creeped her out, but she needed to go inside. She needed to see. The doors creaked open with the sound of blaring sirens. Large corrugated metal sheets, like floodgates, slowly parted to reveal a large room, more like a warehouse than anything else. "Here it is. After you." Slowly, tentatively, Hutch walked into the enormous building. The inside of the building was well lit, spacious and yet eerily quiet. Hutch's footsteps echoed as she walked, as did Grady's. There were various machines and computer stations here and there. A few people with headsets were standing at workshops, and they didn't look up as the two walked by. There were various departments on each side, such as temporal research, geographical research, quantitative research, and finally, biology department. O'Grady knocked on the door to the last one. The door creaked open, and a man looked outside. "Who's the girl?" "She's with me. She's a zoologist the police assigned to the Sharon Point Nanosouchian case."
Nanosouchian? Hutch blurted.
Aren't those extinct?
O'Grady raised an eyebrow. "You thought I was joking, didn't you? The stuff about temporal aberrations and creatures? It was all legit." Hutch's mouth hung open.
"But how? How could that stuff actually happen?"
"Maybe you better sit down," the man said in the room. "The name's Murder, by the way."
"Hutch. Dr. Merlin Hutch."
The two shook hands, and then Hutch found herself being ushered into the room. 8:23 p.m. The room was sizable, with all manner of adjoining corridors and rooms, and a large computer station. In the center was a large round table with a set of chairs around it. Hutch sat down in one and gazed around the spacious room. O'Grady sat down in front of her and fumbled for a tablet of some sort. "In full story then, we're not called Wepig, we're called Cronus. Our founder, a scientist by the name of Wolfgang Giddings, compiled evidence that rifts in space-time allows animals and microorganisms from both the past and the future to leak into the present day. Most of these temporal aberrations open to other places and times in Earth's history, but there have been 2 incidents where they open to places we can't even identify. Not this planet, that's for sure." He paused for breath. "As of today, the 17th of April 2020, there have been 156 recorded temporal aberrations. The US branch of Cronus isn't doing so well. Most temporal aberrations there open in the country, so any creatures that emerge from there are never found. Heck, the government barely believes in them now. But it's easier to find things in the Outback." He fumbled for something in his pocket. "And that brings us to this." O'Grady passed a slip of paper across the table. Hutch unfolded it and stared at the image. It was of a riverbank, with a boat on the water, Her eyes scanned the image, but nothing looked off. Until she looked at the tree line. The creature there was more dinosaur than crocodile. It stood on 4 erect limbs, its stocky body deeper and thinner. Its skull was like one of those early depictions of Tyrannosaurus rex, deep, boxy, and yet also thin. Large teeth somewhere between those of a crocodile and a dinosaur protruded like tusks. "What you're looking at," O'Grady said, "is Baronosuchus orvali, the biggest and most recent of the Notosuchian crocodiles. What you're dealing with isn't a saltwater crocodile. It's this guy. And that's why you're here. You're a scientist. A crocodile scientist, no less. Dr. Hutch, you're the only person in Australia who's in the right situation for this. We need your help. So, what do you think?" Hutch just stared at him, dumbfounded.
It's a lot to take in. What makes you think I'm the best person for the job?
It's not necessarily that. It's mostly because you're in the right place at the right time, really.
Okay. What do you want me to do?
O'Grady smirked a little. We'll need establishing cameras in the right places. Since you're a biologist, we're hoping you could help us. 1:15 a.m. The boat bobbed gently on the river as O'Grady surveyed the forest from the water. Hutch decided on a more direct approach, setting up a small camp in the woods from which to perform her own observations. Camera traps were littered throughout the woods, motion activated to trap whatever appeared. There had already been a few sightings, but they were nothing more than the odd brush-tailed possum. As the night advanced, the marsupials' activities became more and more frantic. They busied themselves with finding food directly in the camera's line of sight. Hutch watched it all with increasing disappointment. So far, the Baronosuchus was a no-show. After a long while, Hutch just decided to call it a night. After sending a quick broadcast to O'Grady, she rested her head on the sleeping bag she brought with her and closed her eyes. She thought about the events of the past few hours. Until midday, she thought she was dealing with a routine salty incident. But extinct land crocodiles? How often did that happen? Hutch lay there for a while, looking up at the filmy fabric of the tent. If the Baronosuchus tried to attack her now, it would have no trouble bursting inside. All she had on her was a knife. Would that even be enough? The thought of it made Hutch a little anxious, but she tried to keep those thoughts at bay. She needed sleep after the tumultuous day she'd had. O'Grady was already on lookout duty. She didn't even get a chance to fall asleep. There was a buzz of static from one of the monitors in the tent as it flickered to life. Hutch frantically leapt to her feet, scrambling over to the screen. And then she finally saw it with her own 2 eyes. The Baronosuchus was easily the length of the largest salties. At least 6 meters, she guessed. It stood on 4 erect pillar-like limbs, its tail long, almost dinosaurian. And as for its head, concealed by vegetation, she could already tell that it was just as enormous as the rest of the creature. Hutch fumbled for her radio, plucking it from her pocket and raising it to her face.
"Hey, O'Grady," she whispered. "It's here. I've got it on the camera trap."
"Got it. Keep your eyes peeled." He paused.
"It's outside the bloody tent."
From outside there was a sound of bushes crashing, branches cracking, and then a low snort. Her eyes shot open as she listened, and the snuffling and snorting came ever closer. It sounded like the heavy, hissing breaths of a very big crocodile. This was it. There was the noise of a tranquilizer gun firing, and a moment later the tent collapsed in on itself, the boxy skull of the Baronosuchus smashing through it. Hutch yelped, fabric tore as the Notosuchian bellowed, its hot breath steaming up the air around it. Pupils more like those of a bird than a crocodile fixed on her, and its huge jaws snapped shut merely centimeters from her head, spraying her with saliva. Another gunshot. No reaction. Hutch pulled out a knife and waved it in the air, sprawled on the floor as the giant Notosuchian loomed over her. Its jaws opened slowly, its front leg raised into the air. It had her cornered now, so it couldn't afford to be slow about it. The Baronosuchus lunged for Hutch, and then she swung her knife with all of her strength. There was a painful squelching noise, and then a pitiful moan from the Barinasuchus. It pulled back, bellowing, as the knife lodged itself into the Notosuchian's eyeball. More gunshots. But this time, they weren't tranquilizer darts. Finally, the mighty animal slumped to the ground, lifeless. Hutch scrambled to her feet and looked at it. Definitely dead. She'd seen enough. Staggering out of her tent, she looked across at O'Grady, who stood in the boat holding a different gun, a sniper rifle.
Good.
Hutch yelled, breathless.
Good timing.
She glanced down one last time at the carcass of the Barinasuchus, its one good eye wide with shock. The scientist in her felt disappointment. It was a specimen in the prime of its life, healthy and large. But her rational mind quickly overruled that. She was just as glad that it was over. 11:53 a.m. Madeline Hutch was noticeably exhausted when she came into work the next day, and Brett Abbott, who had been visiting the Zoological Institute for more information on the crocodile case, picked up that straight away. He was always the sort of person to take note of any unusual behavior, and honestly, he was little concerned. So when Hutch sat down in a nearby chair, he gave her a friendly, if concerned, smile and walked over. "You must have had a long day yesterday. What's up?" Hutch stared straight ahead, her expression blank. She looked as though she'd rather be anywhere else but there at that moment.
You can say that. Things hit the fan a lot harder than I was expecting.
Things? What do you mean?
Big Salty. Wildlife rangers in Sharon Point took it down.
Ah. You sure you're alright?
I'm fine. I just need some time off. Sort my head out.
I'll leave you to it, Abbott said, raising to his feet. I'll see you tomorrow. Walking towards the door, Abbott took a deep breath and pushed it open. He didn't believe what Hutch said at all. Once a copper, always a copper. And because of that, he considered himself a pretty good judge of character. There was something more going on here. He was determined to figure it out. One way or another.